I think I mentioned a little bit too, the idea of about a lot of times in churches, we end up with Christians who are 35-year-old babies, right? They've been a Christian 35 years, and they still sit in church, and they're going to the pastor, feed me, feed me, feed me, you know? And you walk away and you're disappointed, oh, but the pastor didn't preach a very good sermon today, I didn't get fed. Hey, you're a stinking adult, feed yourself. You know, like as it was mentioned, it's one thing to have a little baby, and you feed them, right? But if that little baby's 35 years old, then you got a problem. You just have to carry him around and feed him, and there's a major problem there. So the idea in Christianity, we grow up, we're growing to maturity. Yes,
Could you just go back, please, on the, could you go back, please?
We go back or that go back?
Yeah, yeah, thank you.
So yeah, yes, Madeleine.
I just have a quick question, like, the verse ends at perfect, not grow up, right? Cause I ends it, right?
Yeah, no, I threw in the grow up myself.
Okay, I was like, where's that part of it? Okay,
Yeah.
okay.
But it's, the
Small
second,
question.
the second one, it does say grow up. Grow up in every way. In every way, not just spiritually, but grow up in every way. Become mature. I think becoming mature is being perfect. That's right. Yes, Alicia.
Oh, wait, you can. Yeah, wait, so perfect isn't actually perfect, it's strong.
Mature, yeah. When we talk about the Greek
Yeah.
word for perfection is always used, it never was used anywhere else except when you're describing a fruit that's absolutely ripe, just perfect. The full potential of that fruit is there. It can't get any more fruit perfect. You know, that's as good as it gets. And so the Greeks said, perfection. Never does it have to do with human behavior of being perfect, which means you never make a mistake. That's not it. It's the maturity into who you are, using all that potential that's there, making it perfect. And you do it by taking on these responsibilities. Okay, you good, Guillaume?
Almost.
Okay,
10
almost.
seconds more,
Can you
please.
take a picture of it? Yeah, and write it once.
Becca.
Do you think we'll ever reach that full maturity in Christ on that?
No, and that's why I use the term being the best version of yourself you can be. We may not make it, but you know, if you shoot for perfection, 100%, and you only get 80%, that's pretty good, you know? If you have no goals, if you have no desire and nothing to shoot it for, and you do it, then you know, you probably won't, you know, you might make it a little ways, but you won't make it nearly as far as if your goal is, hey, I'm gonna use all the things that God's given me, like Nick. I'm gonna use everything he's given me to, not for my own being, this is what Guillaume brought up, a really good question at the break. Because he was saying, you know, he was in the kind of personal, you know, the personal development and all this kind of, he said, well, isn't that the world's way of doing things? And I said, absolutely, yes. These principles work. The only thing is, when you take God out of the equation and it's just personal well-being and personal development, yeah, it doesn't go anywhere. There's no eternal value in that.
Yeah.
But for us, when you understand that we are now workers in the kingdom of God, and that our lives are invested now, not just in us, you know, being the best person we can be for our own sake. It's not for us. It's so that then God can use us in his kingdom, and at the end of the day, we glorify Christ. So all this motivation, the motivation back of this is on the spiritual side of our goal is to glorify Christ. Our goal is to be faithful servants. Our goal is to take what God has given us and mature it into everything it can be so he can use us to our maximum.
Yeah.
So it's not just for ourselves. It is a means to an end to glorify Christ. That is the bottom line. Okay. So yeah, the feed me mentality. Now, taking on personal responsibility. Let's start there. It all begins with this. if we don't take on personal responsibility for ourselves, then we will never, ever be able to move forward. The reason why is we will continually either blame other people for our problems, or it's always somebody else's fault, not my responsibility. And we refuse to take on the idea that we are responsible for our own being, okay? Now, and this is kind of interesting. I can remember when I first kind of got a glimmer of this, and this sounds rather silly, but for me it was the start, where I forget what I was doing. I was hiking somewhere, I think, or I was fishing somewhere. I don't remember what it was, but I'm walking down the trail, and there's a piece of trash, and I thought, yeah, some idiot left the trash. Somebody needs to pick that up. And I started to walk away, and I thought, yeah, maybe I have to take responsibility to pick up the trash, you know. So I picked up a piece of trash. That was my start. That's pretty impressive, huh? Yeah. That was my start. And so I took responsibility for that. And then, as you grow, then you take on more and more responsibility. I'm responsible for this, nobody else, I can't blame anybody else. I can't say it's somebody else's fault. I am responsible. I own it. Now, the question, and the trick here is, there's certain things you need to own, and there's other things that you do not need to own. You're not responsible for. And separating those two things out is really important. For example, you are responsible for yourself. You are not responsible for other people. Right? You can't make the decisions for them. They have to own themselves. And this was the great, probably the greatest discovery that came out of the Renaissance was John Stuart Mill in his idea of you own yourself. Which gives you then rights. We talked about that the other day, remember? In order to govern man has to own himself and then voluntarily agree in that contractual agreement with the government to be governed, called the Constitution. And then man is given human rights. So that's what balances it all out. So the whole idea of human rights started with John Stuart Mill out of the Renaissance. But if we don't take responsibility for ourselves, then we become victims, okay? We're the victim. So then, if you're the victim, you feel angry, bitter, helpless, hopeless, because there's nothing you can do about it. Or at least there's nothing that you want to do about it. So if we play the victim, you're not going to go anywhere. Now, it's a little complicated in the sense that sometimes there's a difference between being a victim. So, for example, if somebody steals my wallet, now I'm the victim of being robbed, right? Okay, that's something that happened to me. I'm a victim in that sense. But there's a difference between being a victim or actually feeling like I am the victim. It wasn't me that got, it's my wallet that was the victim, I guess, the money, whatever it was that was taken from me. But so I was a victim at one level, and another level, I'm not a victim as a being. I'm personally responsible for my own life and my own self, and I have to take ownership of it. And we can't blame anybody else for what happens to us. Even though we've been wronged, even though we've been maybe abused, whatever it happens to be, you have to at least accept the responsibility then for dealing with it. So it's not your fault but it is your problem.
Yes.
So if you've been sexually abused, let's say, for example, it's not your fault, usually as a kid. Not your fault at all, but it is your problem. You gotta deal with it. So there's a big difference. So you can't say, well, make excuses, well, I was sexually abused when I was a kid, and so that's why I'm this and that and whatever, and there's nothing I can do about it. No. You were a victim in the sense that something happened to you, so it wasn't your fault, but it is your problem to own. And if you never own it, you will never fix it, right? If you don't own it, it will never get better. You'll just keep kicking it down the road, and there's no growth, there's no help. Here's an interesting concept. Immanuel Kant was probably the best, it's hard to say, one of the best philosophers that ever came out of both Renaissance and or the Enlightenment era. And he is incredibly bright and almost impossible to read. I think philosophers have to get paid by their word, and they have their own terminology, they have their own vocabulary, really. But I'll shrink this down. Immanuel Kant was also a believer, and he, during the age of reason and during the scientific age, God was out of the equation. And Immanuel Kant's, one of his things he wanted to do was try to show the necessity for God. Let's put it that way. And C.S. Lewis, are you familiar with C.S. Lewis? Okay. C.S. Lewis, in his The Problem of Pain, takes up basically Kantian ideas to also try to prove or show at least an apologetic for the existence of God. So Immanuel Kant said this, and it was in a book I think called The Critique of Pure Reason. And so he was critiquing reason, because during that time, remember, reason was God. Reason and science, that's all you had to work with. And he said, well, with man, we have within us what we'll call the goodness detector and a truth detector. And it works something like this. So you're listening to me talk, right? And you're asking yourself, is what Doug's saying, is it true? Have you asked yourself that yet? A lot. Carmen's going, yeah. So, the question is, well, who are you asking? You're asking your truth detector, right? Something within you that has the ability to detect whether something you've heard is true or not true. Same with goodness. If I help somebody or want to help somebody and I'm trying to do that, the person that I'm trying to help has to say to themselves, is what he's doing good or is it bad? Is it evil, helpful? Who are you asking? You're asking your goodness detector. There's something that is within us that is not accountable through evolutionary process, that is there, that protects us and guides us in terms of defining morality and reality. Is it truthful or is it not? Is it help? Is it good or is it evil? And based in that, it's something that goes beyond nature and therefore must come from the other world, God. So that was Kant's argument. And we all have that truth detector, right? To some degree, some people have it more than others maybe. And we have a goodness detector of things that are good and good things that are evil. And that's not learned, it's not a social construct. It's something that is part of our computer word. Don't correct me if I'm wrong. It's part of the motherboard. It's part of the fabric. It's in there. You don't create it. It's there. Yes, Natalie.
Just clarifying, so this guy was a Christian during the Renaissance, kind of, trying to prove that God's existence within science, and the way that he was saying that God does exist is because you have a conscience?
Pretty much, yeah, because a conscience is something that is, there's no good reason, there's no evolutionary
Reason to have a
reason to have a conscience.
No,
To
that
have
makes
this,
sense.
this goodness detector and this, truth detector. But when you think about it, it's the thing that keeps us alive, you know? Is it a good idea to step out in front of a bus? No. Your mom tells you no. Well, is that true or not? Yeah, you go, if you don't believe that, then, you know, you got a problem. So, it's part of our ability then to know how we take on responsibility. What are we responsible for?
Oh,